Over the 1930s, journey times from Belfast to the north coast sped up dramatically, with passenger numbers reaching an all-time high in the 11 years that followed the Bleach Green line's opening. Despite all of this, the Knockmore Line continued to operate regional commuter and freight rail, as it was still a vital railway link to and from South Antrim. The Bleach Green Line and the Knockmore Line were to run simultaneously for the foreseeable future, but with the majority of northbound traffic to use the Bleach Green Line instead. During the financial struggles of the 1930s caused by the increasing number of cars on the road, the Northern Ireland Transport Board was established to try and help relieve financial issues for the railways by gathering all revenue for the road and rails and distributing it fairly. However, this was unsuccessful, and the railways ended up receiving little to no financial support at the time, likely thanks to the CEO of car companies lining the pockets of politicians in exchange for them underfunding the railway so people would have no choice but to buy their cars. But somehow, despite all of these problems, it was still seen as a good time for the railways, especially on the lines to Londonderry and Portrush. As the 1930s came to a close, however, there was a new threat that not only threatened the railways, but also threatened the entire population to its very core.
In their homeland, there's a choice of all 4 seasons at any time of the year. But in Northern Ireland, it's just one kind only: winter.
The fascists of the German Reich had begun their insatiable conquest to rule all of Europe with an iron fist, and with the United Kingdom being their greatest enemy for a second time, this put Northern Ireland in a very precarious situation. With the advent of World War II, Northern Ireland saw a dramatic increase in the reliance and usage of the railways. The railways were now being used for a much greater purpose, like helping bring troops from the ports at Larne and Londonderry to army camps and bases all throughout the country. Northern Ireland was quickly becoming a military powerhouse seemingly overnight, and this got dramatically more obvious as the United States entered the war following the attack on Pearl Harbor. But the military wasn't the only reason the railways became so busy during the war. Thanks to fuel rationing and shortages, civilians were now using the railways once again in much larger numbers than before. Thanks to the fact that people were unable to use their own cars, as most petrol and diesel was being directed towards the war machine. Passenger journeys went from 10 million a year in 1934 to a staggering 24.5 million in 1944. Even the number of goods traffic doubled within that same 10-year period, and the Knockmore Line saw a huge number of troop movements, as it was a vital link to the RAF aerodromes at Aldergrove, Nuts Corner and Langford. With the Second World War and all its great suffering, it truly gave our railways an amazing era to behold. As the war drew to a close, this great era for the railways did too. Passenger and goods journeys started to decline back to their pre-war numbers, and so did their profits. This presented a new issue, however: how could the government make the railways more profitable? The response to this was the Transport Act of 1948, which nationalised the railways and put them and the roads under the control of the Ulster Transport Authority. The UTA then put forward their plan to make the railways more profitable, a plan that would change Northern Ireland forever. This plan was to close 60% of the railway lines in Northern Ireland. Now, many people over the years have argued that the UTA's goal of making the railways more profitable was nothing more than a feint to try and cover up the fact that the UTA had a very anti-Catholic rhetoric among their staff, and wanted to disadvantage the minority population as much as they could to prevent the growth of their community and thus Irish nationalism in Northern Ireland, which would call for reunification. These claims have been disputed for decades, but regardless to their legitimacy, one thing remains clear: the UTA's decision to close so much of the Northern Ireland Railway network was wrong, as well as it being far too extensive. Over the period of 1950 until 1966, Northern Ireland's rail network was slowly dismantled as the car rose to prominence. By 1960, the railways of Northern Ireland had been largely demolished and sold off to anyone who would buy, as to make it as hard as possible to rebuild in the future without full government support. These lines included, but were not limited to, almost the entirety of the Belfast and County Down railway network, and the entire railway network in the county of Fermanagh and its surrounding rural areas. These closures left hundreds of thousands of people without a public transport network that many of them had relied on and used for their entire lives. But the UTA were not finished. In 1962, Sir Henry Benson completed his report on the future of the UTA, and his report suggested that the UTA close all rail lines in Northern Ireland except for the lines to Larne, Bangor and Dublin. But this proposal was a step much too far. Residents from every proposed closure protested and sent angry letters to the government to how the UTA could even think up such an idea, and with all the sustained backlash, the UTA backed down on their plan to close the lines. But 3 years later, the UTA decided to enact on part of Benson's plan to close the vital rail network between Portadown and Londonderry. The Derry Road, as it was more commonly called, served some of Northern Ireland's largest towns, as well as its second city, for over a century. But this didn't matter to the UTA. The Derry Road's fate was sealed. In 1967, a Transport Act was put in that finally dissolved the UTA and put an end to their reign of railway terror. During the period of UTA madness, the Bleach Green and Knockmore lines continued their metaphorical rivalry, thankfully staying out of the UTA's anti-rail vision. The Bleach Green line, however, was suffering from a lot of issues in the post-war era compared to its rural counterpart. During the Second World War, the railway lines in and around Belfast were extremely restricted in maintenance, and this meant that journey times on the Bleach Green line were unable to match their pre-war peaks. On top of that, there was considerable work needed to be done on the York Road station, which had been bombed by the Germans during the Blitz. All of these costs left no budget for railway expansions or even proper maintenance in some cases. The Bleach Green line was starting to fall into disrepair. After the UTA was dissolved and Northern Ireland Railways were established, NIR were already starting to set out exciting new plans to help support rail travel. Into the early 1970s, the Bleach Green line finally lost its freight traffic to the seemingly unstoppable competition produced by the roads, with the Knockmore line going the same way around the same time. In 1972, the McKinsey Report on Public Transport in Northern Ireland was presented, and it stated that the Bleach Green line was going to require significant capital investment to keep it running into the foreseeable future. Then, in 1978, after a period of discussion, the decision was made to close the Bleach Green line altogether. Since 2/3 of the Green Island Loop had been dismantled, with only the Belfast to Larne portion remaining, there was now only one way for trains coming from Londonderry to Belfast to get to the city directly. For the first time in decades, the Knockmore line was now once again the most important railway line in the country for getting trains to and from stations north of Belfast, as there was now quite literally no alternative. With this and the closure of Great Victoria Street a year later, replaced with Belfast Central Station, Northern Ireland's railway network is starting to finally level out and sit still. The major benefit, however, is that with the Londonderry to Belfast service terminating at Belfast Central, this meant that now a through train from Londonderry to Dublin was possible. Another interesting fact is that Northern Ireland Railways trialled a rail bus service from Antrim to Belfast York Road via the now closed Bleach Green line. However, the idea never really took off, and the line stayed closed only to be used as a link for getting trains to the York Road workshops. NIR executives, however, noted that because all the lines except Larne finished at Central, where the Larne line finished at York Road, this left the Larne line very isolated from the rest of the network. In response to this issue, Chief Executive of NIR, Roy Beattie, proposed a cross-harbour rail link be built in order to end the isolation of the Larne line due to the Bleach Green line's closure. The main benefits stated to come with this new railway line were a wider range of through services would now be possible, engineering facilities could finally be centralised in one site, the ability to attract more tourists by connecting Larne Harbour Station to Dublin, allowing for passengers from all over the UK, Ireland and the EU to get here by boat and train, and the opportunity to attract a European Economic Community grant. These benefits vastly outweighed the cons, and it seemed likely that it would happen. However, a change of government and their decision to cut public spending put the cross-harbour rail link on ice. 15 years passed after the proposal was put on ice before, on the 28th of November 1984, the cross-harbour rail link was finally constructed. This new railway link brought a new question into the light. Can we reopen the Bleach Green line and restore direct services between Belfast and Antrim? Since the closure of the Bleach Green, the Knockmore line had become a part of daily railway life. It kept rural communities connected to the rest of the country and allows those communities to experience the growth that railway connections often bring with them. The proposal to reopen the Bleach Green line now threatened to weaken that link once again, or perhaps remove it altogether. As soon as the cross-harbour rail link was completed in 1994, NIR were more than ready to invest further to restore the direct connection between Antrim and Belfast. In November of 1994, the Bleach Green reopening project was approved by Minister Malcolm Moss. Consultants were appointed, and the project then moved to the tender stage, with contractors ready to be appointed, when, at the last second, the project was suspended. The reason for suspension was that NIR, Ulsterbus and Citybus, now Metro, were all being put under an umbrella brand, Translink. 3 years later, in 1998, the Bleach Green reopening project was ready to make a comeback, and Translink presented it to the government as soon as they could. On Friday the 18th of September 1998, Lord Dubs, the Minister for the Environment, announced the project's approval for the second time. Everyone in the South Antrim area were unsure of what would happen when the Bleach Green line was reopened, but one thing was certain: the line's very existence was threatened. At a cost of £14.5 million, around £33 million today, the Bleach Green Line's construction sprang into life, with the first stage of the works taking place on the bridges. 28 small bridges along the route had handrails installed, were repainted and had their structures strengthened as well as their joints grouted. The work on the viaducts themselves was a much more demanding job. The viaducts had to be blast cleaned, have concrete repaired all over the structure and be waterproofed and repainted, which for a viaduct that is 630 feet long and 70 feet tall, it was a lot of work for a lot of men. One quirk, due to the fact the viaduct was now a listed structure, is that any concrete repairs had to be done with wooden shuttering as to preserve the marks that were made on the viaduct when it was first constructed. Thankfully though, there were minimal repairs required, which was a testimony to the unrivaled quality of work done all the way back in the 1930s. After the bridges and viaduct were repaired and dressed up, the tracks were then given full attention. The track work took some 12 months to complete, spanning from November 1989 to November of 2000. The track works also used a huge amount of materials such as 110,000 tonnes of ballast, 37,000 sleepers, 53,000 metres of rails, 145,000 metres of cabling, 20,000 metres of fencing, and 23,000 metres of drainage pipes. The way the contractors distributed the materials over the site was also extremely unique, as they contracted a steam engine from the Railway Preservation Society of Ireland, RPSI, in Whitehead to haul ballast wagons up and down the line during the track's construction. This was the first time in many years that a steam locomotive had a role in railway construction in Ireland, and it serves as a focal point to help grasp how massive of an operation this was for NIR at the time. Along with all of that, there were also many level crossings installed with half barriers and full barriers plus CCTV. Signalling specialist Server Rail were then contracted to deliver the new signalling for the line. As for the new stations, 4 potential sites were surveyed: Mossley West, Templepatrick, Monkstown and Knockmore. Mossley West and Templepatrick were chosen as the 2 sites with the most benefit to the local communities. In 1999, design work was started for the 2 new stations, with NIR stating that the consultants, contractors and the railway company have been in close communication at all stages of the development of the new station sites with local community representatives, individual landowners, the Department of Environment, road service officials and council representatives. In 2001, after over 20 years, the Bleach Green Line was finally finished. However, despite what NIR had previously stated, Templepatrick Railway Station was never completed. In fact, it was never even started to begin with, and Northern Ireland Railways never provided an answer as to why Templepatrick Railway Station was never reinstated. To this day, it is still a serious mistake that needs to be rectified, as Templepatrick is a town that could more than benefit from a railway station. After the Bleach Green Line was reinstated, mainline services from Londonderry to Belfast were once again ran along it. This reduced the rail traffic on the Knockmore Line dramatically, but to make things even worse, Translink announced shortly after the Bleach Green Line's reopening that the Knockmore Line was to be operated on a skeleton service and that the line and all of its stations were due to be closed in June of 2003. For the residents of South Antrim, their worst fear had come true. For the thousands of people that used the line to commute to work, school or even university, they were now faced with the reality that over half of the country was faced with half a century before. The residents of Crumlin, Glenavy, Ballindery, Knockmore and even Antrim and Lisburn now had to prepare to adjust for a negative change that benefited nobody. Northern Ireland Railway's reasoning for closing the Knockmore Line was stated as, "It is not economically viable for us to run 2 rail services from Antrim to Belfast simultaneously." And with that, it was done. In June of 2003, the last thump was heard and the line fell silent.
A familiar sight in Crumlin, but not for much longer. At the end of February, the railway line between Antrim and Lisburn is due to close. It cuts off the service from Crumlin, Glenavy and Ballindery to make way for the new Bleach Green route. But those taking the train from Crumlin today weren't impressed.
I think it's a very bad idea. It leaves myself and a lot of other people stranded in Glenavy. It's a small village that relies on the transport to and from it, and without the trains, the transport's greatly reduced.
In the 20 years since the line's closure, not much traffic has seen those rails again, apart from a few rail tours and diversions. But in the last decade, glimmers of hope have started to seep through the cracks of despair. In 2014, a proposal was put forward to build a new Lisburn West railway station on the site of an old Southeastern Regional College on the Knockmore Road. This station would be situated on the site of the Knockmore Line itself, and theoretically, any train looking to stop at the platform on the station side of the tracks would logically be serving the Antrim to Lisburn line. This station was slated to begin construction in 2015-16, however it never happened and the plans were subsequently abandoned. But then in 2019, the plans were resurrected and planning permission was granted for the station in 2021, however any work has yet to be started. In September of 2016, the Democratic Unionist Party proposed reopening the line as part of an airport link, however no progress was made on that development. However, I do vividly remember in summer of 2016 watching Translink relay track on the railway bridge over 6 Mile Water and repainting it in NIR blue. Then in November of 2019, 3 years later, Units 3002 and 3003 completed a radio test over the entire NIR network. This radio test included stations at Lisburn West, Ballindery, Glenavy, Crumlin and the Belfast International Airport area. This development sparked a lot of hope in the railway activism community that they were planning to reopen the line, but of course it did not amount to anything promising. And with that, we close the book on the history of the Knockmore and Bleach Green railway lines. Today, the Knockmore line sits dormant, slowly being reclaimed by nature despite Translink using the line for driver training duties. It sees little to no traffic, but now in recent months there have been some positive developments that I want to address before we talk about how this line could and should be reopened. Around October of 2022, Translink published an article on their website outlining the Lisburn area renewal, a 1.5-year long project aimed at refurbishing and upgrading the lines in and around Lisburn. These refurbishments and upgrades are replacing the old wiring around the route relay interlocking location with new equipment to maintain operational performance, as well as general signalling improvements to help future-proof the railway network, improving the track layout by reorganising switches and crossing units to make the track easier to maintain, thus leading to less disruption along the line, as well as the removal of the 40 mph speed limit that affects all trains to the west of Lisburn station. And finally, an extension of Platform 3 at Lisburn station that will allow for better access to the new 6-car trains. These works are said to last from October of 2022 until spring of 2024, with multiple stages and days-long closures to take place. The main reason these works matter is that on the map of the works for the Lisburn area, they have the Knockmore line highlighted in yellow, but they also state that the Antrim branch is to receive new bidirectional signalling. For those that don't know, bidirectional signalling allows for one or more tracks on a single line to operate in both directions. Bidirectional signalling is more expensive than unidirectional signalling, only one way, but for single track lines it is essential. Since the Knockmore line's closure almost 20 years ago, all of the signalling along the line has been removed. Only the line entrances have signals to prevent trains from entering the line. This development is most definitely interesting, as it hints at the fact that they are installing new signalling on the line as a way of preparing for it to be reopened. But of course, at the same time, one could argue that the line is only getting new signalling on part of the track, as the map only has a yellow box around a short distance of track, but I don't believe this is the case, and here's why. The area outlined by the yellow box on the map stretches far beyond where the last crossing point is on the track currently. As seen from these photographs, there is only one point where a train could leave Platform 3 and get onto the main line. I searched meticulously on Google Earth looking for a second point further along the line, but to no avail. So that begs the question, why the new signalling? As any train coming out of Platform 3 onto the main line, heading to Portadown, won't even pass a single signal until it is off the Antrim branch and on the main line. On top of that, I recently spoke to a man on Facebook who works for Translink or a Translink affiliated company, who stated that Lisburn West Station is to begin construction later this year with a finishing date of 2025. Now, whether you believe that or not is entirely your decision, but this man stated that they are first building Lisburn West as a way to relieve pressure off of the main Lisburn station before reopening the Knockmore line a few years later. This would all make perfect sense as to why the Antrim branch is having new bidirectional signalling installed so far down the line, and then all they would have to do is add a new point to the track at the Knockmore junction to connect the two lines. This, in my opinion, is the most likely scenario as to how it will play out, and I look forward to seeing if I'm correct or not in the near future. Thank you for watching part 2 of the Open Knockmore series. If you're enjoying this series, then please make sure to like us and subscribe and follow us on Twitter, and also sign the petition to have the Knockmore line reopened. In part 3 coming up soon, we will be discussing the reopening and how it could and should be done. But other than that, have a good day and goodbye.